All right, it's now time for us to have that much-awaited conversation about the future of jobs in the wake of COVID-19. It is about 6 months, I would say, since Kenya reported its first case, and the numbers have kept surging over time, with several succumbing to this deadly virus. But what is standing out is how this has impacted the way of life. We've seen several businesses collapsing, others have opted to close shop. We've seen even in the employment sector, there are people who've had to lose their jobs, and also some to just survive with pay cuts. And it's just a disruption that several people are still coming to terms with, even as we move into the sphere where we are trying to adjust to this new normal. Today we want to be a bit biased and focus on the job sector and just look at how this pandemic has affected us, what lessons we are drawing, what are some of the gaps that have become obvious, and what is being done to fill these gaps. And to help me have this conversation is none other than Dr. Josephine Mwanzia. She is the Director, Academic Affairs at the Kenya School of Government. Thank you so much for creating time for us this afternoon. Dr. Josephine, karibu sana on the show. As we kick off now, I just want to understand as a general statement from you, coronavirus has been with us for several months now. I don't know if you were to observe the trends and how the infection has really disrupted the way of life, what would you say are the sectors that have been worst hit by this pandemic, and in what way?
Thank you, Seraphine, for having me. I'm from the Kenya School of Government. This is an institution that trains public servants in both national and county governments to build capacity to be able to deliver on their mandates, and also to be able to support development in the country. Allow me, Seraphine, to say that COVID has actually brought about unprecedented norms, both in the public sector and in the private sector. Let me start with the public sector. When COVID struck, we began to experience disruptions. And we all know that spans of work in the public service are very structured. Public institutions operate with strategic plans, with very clear goals, with performance contracts, and with systems and policies that are monitored and implemented through programs. But when COVID came, we were unprepared. Of course, we do have strategic plans, but we can never be adequately prepared for a crisis because it comes without warning. So we see disruptions in programs that were being implemented. We see officers can no longer go to the office, and they have to work remotely from home, appropriating information communication technologies. We are noting that, yes, it is possible for public servants to adjust, but there are levels of adjustment that require realignment. We are observing that there are capacity gaps that probably need to be strengthened.
And I want us, sorry to cut you short, but I want us to focus on those specific gaps, because we are talking about crucial services that are offered by government institutions that were disrupted for some time before we adjusted to this new way of providing these services. What do you think are these gaps that became obvious when COVID-19 struck, that probably as we go along, you're trying to find opportunities of how to, fill these gaps? What are those gaps from where you sit?
Okay, thank you. Some of the gaps that we have observed, and I want to speak about the training industry. One of the gaps and the challenges that we faced is learning was being conducted face-to-face. And the participants had to come to a structured classroom. But then, when COVID came, social distancing is one of the rules of the thumb, one of the regulations that we need to observe. And so classes had to stop for a while. And what was required are ways of learning that were going to be sensitive to the social distancing protocol. So one of the gaps we have observed is that Most institutions need to re-engineer their infrastructure, and particularly information communication technologies, to be able to support learning online or virtually. Let us look at the supply chains of food, for example. People were unprepared for disruptions in the transportation. People were unprepared for even production. And so some of the alignments that needed to be done, particularly to enable transportation of food and other essentials, needed to be realigned in such a manner that people are not going to suffer. And we see, of course, the lockdown that is being implemented in major cities. We also see the curfew that is affecting certain working hours. Obviously, that has affected production. And what we are saying is that institutions need to be more prepared to be able to deal with challenges and crises such as the one that we are facing currently. Let me say that leadership is very critical. At times of crisis like now, when we are facing such disruptions, where travel bans have been issued, we are facing in the tourism industry, we are realizing that the influx and the movement is not possible, even locally, internationally. That has come down. And when we look at the small and medium-term enterprises, we also realize that actually people have lost jobs, because if they can't go to work, then they are unable to produce the merchandise and the products which they sell. And that means there is reduced income. That means they do not have even food. And so these are challenges that have come with COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And yes.
I was just thinking about how the disruptions that what we also experienced in imports and exports when there was a ban on international travel. Mm-hmm. And of course, we can talk about several spheres on how this pandemic has affected us. But I want us to be a bit positive and look at how we have managed so far, what we have done as a country to adjust to this new normal. There are people who could be watching this interview and they're asking, is there hope? Are there efforts that have been put in place for us to fill these gaps? Is there something that is happening behind closed doors or even in the public domain that has really assisted us to adjust to this new normal? Something that you can share with us this afternoon?
Thank you, Seraphine. Yes. Actually, we could say we are coping very well. When we look at leadership within the government, there is consistent and strategic communication that is going through, particularly from the health sector. We are seeing updates being given to citizenry, and this is to assure citizens that this is something that we can be able to surmount. And citizens are able to build trust on institutions that are meant to assure welfare and promote confidence and trust. Let me say that yes, we are seeing kazi mtaani kwa vijana. The government has rolled out programs that are going to re-engineer the economy so that we do not really lose a lot with COVID. We are aware of the stimulus package that the government has rolled out. We also notice that the government has rationalized budgets. At the Kenya School of Government, we are also seeing the government investing in capacity building. Today, we are concluding a webinar or a seminar that has been discussing these challenges that we are facing as a result of COVID. And what we are learning from that webinar is that actually a lot has been done by government and also in the private sector. And we are seeing a lot of the relationship between the private sector, between the government sector, and also the non-governmental organizations and the multilateral organizations and development partners becoming stronger because of COVID, and investments are being made in high priority areas that are going to ensure that the economy is going to continue working and public institutions will continue providing the services and the goods and products that they are supposed to provide. SMEs, I earlier said that have been hard hit, but through the stimulus package, the government is also targeting those sectors so that they are revived. And through such policies and programs such as Build Kenya, Buy Kenya, we are going to see a lot of investments and the nation and the economy beginning to grow in such times of crisis as today.
For those who probably may have lost their jobs, some have been forced to close down their businesses, and right now, as we speak, they're caught up between a rock and a hard place. They're asking themselves, are there opportunities I can explore probably during this pandemic? Is there something I can do so that at least I can, sustain myself? What would you advise?
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, in times of crisis, we also see there is also innovation that happens in such times. We are all aware of this adage that a captain's competence is tested in times of crisis and when the sea is extremely turbulent. What I would say is that, yes, some have lost jobs, but we are also seeing a silver lining in the dark cloud. There are new areas of job opportunities that are emerging. Who would have known that we would be able to manufacture and innovate masks, PPEs at a time of crisis? We are also seeing the information communication technology sector thriving at this time. When I look at the training and capacity development industry, the school, for example, is able to continue providing services online. And what we are seeing is that there is that shift that most organizations are making, restructuring themselves, reviewing their policies, re-engineering their processes and systems of service delivery so that they are able to continue serving the purpose for which they are established, and particularly providing services to the citizenry and ensuring that our economy continues to grow and even thrive in such times of crisis as we have today.
All right, wonderful insights you're sharing there, Dr. Josephine, but unfortunately, because of time, we may not continue. Just, as your parting shot, we do not know when we are going to come out of this pandemic. It's just a matter of finding a way of surviving through it. What would you say are some of the priority areas that we should focus on in terms of investment of efforts and even resource going forward? What should be important as we continue navigating through this pandemic?
Okay, thank you, Seraphine. I want to highlight 4 priority areas of investment at this time of COVID. One of the priority areas that I would like investments made is in review and re-engineering of organizational systems and structures. We need to strengthen our institutions. And the investments that we need to undertake that process are very critical because they are going to stabilize us in the short term and in the long term. I would like investments made in capacity development. As I have said earlier, we're going to see new areas of need emerging, and competencies are required to ensure that people are able to perform. So investments in training, capacity development are very, very critical. Programming, investments in programming, so that we identify the high impact programs that are going to enable us stabilize easily and very quickly and come back to course is also very, very critical. Allow me to say we also need investments in development of infrastructure and particularly information communication technologies. We may not know how long COVID is going to be here, but we can be able to continue serving the nation, particularly in service areas, by appropriation of information communication technologies. We also need to build our own competencies and continue learning and encouraging ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Josephine Mwanzia, she is the Director, Academic Affairs at the Kenya School of Government. Thank you for creating time and sharing your insights with us this afternoon. We were talking about COVID-19 and the future of jobs in the country. What is standing out for me from this conversation, from what Dr. has shared, is that a captain's confidence is tested in times of a crisis. We are being tested. The question is, how are we faring? How are we sailing? Are we learning? Are we drawing lessons from this particular crisis? That is a matter of wait and see until the end of the tunnel. That is when we will be able to answer this particular question.